Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi. That's right, I decided it was time to take an on screen persona. And it's that time again. It's midweek, and I want you to play some magic so you can win 2 free rare or better ICRs. This week's Midweek Magic, we're going to be exploring some new avenues of gameplay. That's right, it's the very first Midweek Magic to explore the Explorer format. And since I know this is going to be the first delve for a lot of you into this format, there is a lot to talk about and a lot of deck building and wildcard considerations to make. So, what do you say we get to it? But before we get into all that, my crack research team has recently pointed out that we are the only channel doing consistent and timely midweek magic content. And by crack team, of course, I mean one comment from someone who had nothing at all to do with this monkey image. So be sure to subscribe right here at the Planeswalker Stronghold for all of your future midweek magic needs, because we will be bringing you a deck list or strategy every single week. Now, what were we talking about this week? Oh, yeah, right. All right, so we could not really have a good discussion about this week's midweek magic without talking about the reason for this week's midweek magic. It's the first time we've ever had the Explorer format, and it is no coincidence that they have done this just after the release of the first Explorer anthology. So let's talk about that group of cards. First off, by the time you're seeing this, it's already available. It came out on the 28th. That is actually the day I am recording this. The cost on that is 4,000 gems and or 2,500 gold. So let's start right there. Unless you are the player that is going to be playing Explorer all the time, that wants to be able to build every single deck in Explorer, buying this entire anthology is probably not the right move. For most of you, you're going to be adding 1 or 2 wild cards worth of cards in order to build a specific deck or improve a specific deck. And let's take a look at what some of those things are. White, it did okay, but let's be honest, White didn't really need a whole lot of help. At Uncommon, the favorite Hoplite is probably one of the better budget cards here if you're looking to play a mono white build. Unfortunately, it does not fit into either of the most prominent mono white decks in Explorer for budget players right now, that being the Angels build or the Life Matters build. Blue got an interesting trick here, and something that I think might be a little bit of a sleeper here at Uncommon, and that is Ensoul Artifact. We know that with the release of Dominaria United as well as Brothers War, artifacts are probably going to be coming up in prominence. Ensoul Artifact might be one of those things that goes up in value, but certainly not any reason to spend your wild cards on it just yet. Black got very nearly the most cards of any particular color, and one of the only commons, Shadowborn Apostle. I don't really run this particular deck, um, but these cards where you can have multiple copies and they go up in value always seem to be good. I'm not sure what that deck is going to look like. I haven't really seen it in Pioneer, but clearly they have gone to lengths to introduce that as a deck archetype here in Explorer. Trader of Get is the first mythic in the set. This is also a card I'm not particularly familiar with. A lot of the different zombie builds and things like that tend to be, well, a little shaky and questionable in Pioneer. So clearly they're trying to make something happen here, but I'm not sure what it is. Red, I believe, did get the most cards of any color. Alicia is very nice for a 3/2 first strike for 3. The fact that you can pay with alternative mana costs is very interesting. Searing Blood, I think, is probably the most interesting uncommon and the one that is most likely to get played. But to be honest, I'm not sure I would put this in a mono red build right now, particularly if you're just, well, explorer. If you do end up wanting to go all in on mono red, this might be a place to do it. Green, I think, is probably the most straightforward here. I don't know why they printed Back to Nature. I mean, it does destroy all enchantments, so I guess it's a good silver bullet card against Enchantress. But if you're mostly playing best of one, this is a sideboard card. There you go. Elvish Mystic is a staple in Pioneer. I'm not particularly familiar with the Elf deck in that format. I'm not sure that it's the right place for budget players to be at the moment, but that is definitely a card you're going to be seeing a good bit of this week. The multicolored cards, obviously blue-white got the most here. Blue-white control in particular with Supreme Verdict is very, very nice. Siege Rhino is just a lot of fun if you want to build and play that deck. But 3-color decks are not generally very budget friendly. Slaughter Games, of course, goes into that Rakdos Sacrifice type thing. Walker, they clearly have something going on with constructs and artifacts and things. That's really the only reason I can think of. So the writing's on the wall, guys. Similarly, Darksteel Citadel, it is an artifact land. Yeah, artifacts are going to matter, guys. I'm not sure exactly what it's going to look like, but those two cards right there just tell a story to me that artifacts are going to be coming around a big way. I'd say there is some cards in one of the next two sets specifically meant for artifact builds in Explorer, and that's why they have introduced these two cards as a opening volley, so to speak. Okay, so I said I wasn't going to talk about the historic anthology that came out at the same time, but just to continue that idea of artifacts mattering, in the historic anthology that released, the cycle of common indestructible artifact lands, they're all there. I don't know what they could do that would be a more prominent signal on that. Chalice of the Void also got printed, although more of a sideboard card, to be honest. And one thing you're going to see a lot of potentially this week is Tarmogoyf. This is going to make all those green mages, all those green Timmy mages out there really want to play this card, and you no doubt will see it to some degree in midweek Magic. So just be aware this card exists now for Arena, and it's very, very good. You probably want to kill it as soon as possible, and there you go. Now that we've established there's not a lot to shake up the meta in this new release of cards, let's take a good look at the meta itself. Not surprisingly, the King of the Hill is a mono red. This is everyone's go-to deck for new formats, new meta states after they release new cards, etc., etc., etc. In fact, there are 5 builds in the top of the meta here. I think I pulled 35 decks or so, and 5 of those, 1 out of 7, was a mono red build. Just behind that, again, not surprisingly, is the Selesnya Life Gain Matters deck, because if your opponent is trying to burn you out or rush you with mono red aggro,
one of the best defenses is just gaining a bunch of life, and hopefully you live longer than they have steam and they putter out. Beyond that, we've got a few of tricolor decks, which, to be honest, are not really good budget choices, um, because the mana base is probably going to need to be 8 rares, give or take, uh, to be good anyway. There's always budget alternatives. And then beyond that, we have the other three mono-color decks, or excuse me, the other four. Number 5 in the meta is Mono Blue Tempo, a deck that we have talked a lot about. And if you have recently been making investments into it, that might be the deck for you to play. In fact, it wasn't that long ago I did a Explorer budget decks. I think we talked about 4, one of which was Winota, and obviously that can't be played. But if you're interested in building that mono blue tempo, that is a great video to go back and check out. We have some various Rakdos concepts going on as well. Then at number 16 in the meta, we have mono green. And I have a feeling that's going to rise a little bit in meta popularity here with the release of Tarmogoyf. But if you don't have 4 mythic wildcards to put it into Tarmogoyf and 4 rares to get your 4 copies of Collective Company, mono green might not be the powerhouse that you want it to be. Of course, mono white is always a good budget choice here lately on Arena. The Angels build is just slightly more popular than the mono white life, mostly because that Selesnya life gain just packs a little more oomph in the Explorer format. And mono black, mostly a black devotion deck, came in at number 31 in the meta. And again, that may rise just a little bit if some of these new additions to mono black create some new decks or push existing decks up in ways that I'm just not seeing. Now, as we talked about earlier, red is definitely king of the hill, and there are a total of 5 mono red decks that I pulled as part of the meta sampling for a grand total of just over 20% of the meta and a weighted average of 60% win rate. So pretty consistently good. The main difference between all of these decks is whether they are going for that mono red creature-based rush or more towards the mono red burn, direct damage aspect. And of course, red deck wins kind of covers the ground between those two builds and where you want to put your individual weight. And a lot of that has to come down to the card choices that are part of your collection. So my mental exercise here is, what would happen if we kind of merged all of these overlapping concepts into one super meta deck? What would that teach us about mono red in the Explorer meta?
Well, what you get is a 117 card absolute mess. This is a deck you absolutely should not build, should not spend the wild cards for. But this does tell us a lot about what's going on in the Explorer meta. So let's see if we can clean this up a little bit and try and get this down to a reasonably playable deck. Alright, so first pass what I did is I eliminated nearly all of the 1-ofs from the deck, because honestly I figure that's just placeholders that various deck builds are using because they don't have the cards that they really want to be playing. So I went ahead and just wiped nearly all of those away. I also adjusted the mana base down to preserve rare wild cards, as well as cut the ruins down to 2 copies, because I think that's a pretty budget place to start the conversation. And the last thing I did on this first pass was to go through and bring all the legendary creatures and the mythics down to 1 copy each. Also, Chandra, counting that as a legendary. All right, next up, there is only 4 cards in this list that are currently available in Standard. I have adjusted Kumano down to 3 because that's what comes in your new player experience. And maybe you don't have a 4th copy yet, and the last thing I want you to do is spend a wild card today on something that you will eventually be able to draft or open. In a similar thought, Play with Fire, this list was only running 2 copies. You definitely got 3 in your new player experience, so I'm going to go ahead and bump that up. And that brings us to 63 cards here. So with the next pass, what we're going to do is attempt to remove cards over here that are required as wild cards and replace them with things that are more readily available in your non-rotating standard sets. And let's start that discussion with 1-drop hasty creatures. Fanatical Firebrand, I have cut down to 1 copy because you can get a free copy using the code Shiny Goblin Pirate. That not only gives you the cool cosmetic that you see here, but a copy of the card. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you owe it to yourself to go watch my video, Comprehensive Codes. From there, Fervent Champion is a hasty first strike that pumps the field to a degree if you have multiple copies. It's a great card, but it's also rare and not in today's budget. So we are going to be cutting all 4 copies of that because that card is much better if you run it in a 4 of. Running a single copy is not great. 10 Street Dodger, an uncommon, also in here because it's a 1/1 with haste. Great card, well worth having in your collection, but not in the budget today. So what we want to do is look at what is available to us to maybe replace some of those cards. You definitely got 2 copies of Rabbit Battery and 2 copies of Reinforced Ronin in your new player experience collection. Let's see here. We also got a copy of Reckless Stormseeker. So what do you say we include that? Jaxus, it's only got haste when it blitzes. That could be an option, but I don't think we're there yet. And all the rest of these things are getting much, much higher. Now, don't be surprised if you're seeing cards here that aren't in your collection. I didn't attempt to filter this at all. Don't hate me. All right, so let's talk about the mythics. The deck, as it sits now, has 4 mythics in it. And of course, you probably only had 1 mythic from last year to use on any one particular color. And as we discussed, opening the vault would give you a 2nd mythic wild card. Chandra is available in Standard. I was mistaken. I left that out earlier when we were talking about there was only 4 cards. So if you have a copy of that, run it. If you don't, I would not spend a wild card on this because there is a possibility that you will open or draft that. Embercleave is the mythic that I recommended for the 2022 budget year if you want to play red. So I'm going to make the assumption that you have a copy on that. Now that leaves us Robber of the Rich and Hazoret the Fervent, and 1 wild card between them. And honestly, I think overall Robber of the Rich is a better card for a budget player, for a beginner player. Hazoret is awesome, but this is probably not where you want to start your collection at this point. So I am going to go ahead and cut that out. Next, let's move down to the opposite end of the spectrum and talk about the commons that are in this list. Skewer the Critics is an absolutely fantastic common. If you're going to play a lot of red, this is one of those that you're very quickly going to want 4 copies of. I'm just not sure that this is the deck for that. If we were in something like a bombardment deck or something like that, this card goes way up in value. And honestly, most of the mono red decks in Explorer are not running this card. This is the only one from the 5 lists that we looked at that I didn't initially cut because I thought it might make the conversation, but the reality is it's not. We're going to go ahead and cut that. Similarly, Scorch Spitter is a very good card and something to highly consider for your Explorer/Historic collection. The fact that it deals a point of damage when it swings goes very, very nicely in those bombardment style decks. But again, I don't think this is the place for it. I really don't. We did, I believe, have a copy of it in our wild cards for this year. So if you already have one, I really couldn't argue about you wanting to run it. Honestly, it would make perfect sense. Gitu Lava Runner is one of these ubiquitous commons that you see in any sort of red historic Explorer build. Highly worth the wild cards. If you've got 4 common wild cards that you can feel good about giving them up, this is a solid investment in this deck. If you don't have them, don't worry about it. There are certainly a good amount of 1-drop options in this deck, enough to give you solid plays. I'm going to split the difference and leave 2 in the list, and we'll go from there. And to go from there, we shall right into the uncommons. Of course, we're not going to spend too much time talking about the things that you probably or definitely have from your standard collection that fit nicely into this deck. But where I do want to start is the run-up ruins. If you're playing a lot of red, having 4 copies of this is not going to hurt your feelings at any point in time. But I think as a good way to start out, let's just talk about 1 copy there. Lightning Strike is another one of those ubiquitous 3 damage spells. It can go to face if you need it to, which is a very nice thing. You don't see that as much in instant speed direct damage, but I think 4 copies is a lot to ask, honestly, if you're trying to build this sort of deck on a budget. Similarly, Wizard's Lightning is a fantastic card. It goes down in price to that of a lightning bolt if you happen to control a wizard, and things like your Lava Runner definitely fit nicely into that option. And there's a card here that I'm not seeing. Anyway, we will get back to that. I think for this deck, since we're not running heavy on the Lava Runners, dropping that down to 1 copy is far more reasonable. And Annex, this is a legendary creature. He's really very good in any kind of red rush deck, but I'm not sure that's what we're trying to build here. So in an effort to save wild cards, I would say if you don't have a copy of this, don't invest in him today. Burning Tree Emissary and Light of the Stage. These are both cards that are so good, really in mono red. Having 4 copies of them is staple territory for the format. If you have the wild cards, I would highly suggest investing in these. And if that meant not running Lightning Strike, Wizard's Lightning, or the Ruins, I would put your available wild cards into those 2 cards as opposed to the others. Why can't I do the thing? So that gives you a little more idea of what's going on there. I'm having a terrible time trying to rearrange cards. So Burning Tree Emissaries and Lighted Stage, very worth the investment. If you can't do it today, definitely keep that on your radar if you are a mono red player. These, of course, are also staples in Historic as well. Lightning Strike and Wizard Lightning, again, both worth investing in. I'm just not sure that that's for everyone today. But if you're not familiar with these cards, maybe go ahead and pick up a copy and get familiar with that. Same with the Desert Ruins. And again, this kind of puts them in the order of what I think are the most important. If I had to skimp on something, it would be the Ruins. If I had all the wild cards in the world to burn, I would definitely get my Burning Tree Emissaries and Light Up the Stage. And well, guys, now we got to talk about the rares. I put it off as long as I could. First pass here, I went through and I reduced all the rare wildcards down to 1 copy at most. Castle Embereth, let's start with the lands. This is a fantastic card. If you've got a copy, run it. Maybe even run 2. You'll have to test it out, see how it goes. If you don't have this card already in your collection, I would not spend a wild card on it today. Torbran is a very solid card. He's probably only played in mono red, so this is kind of a tough call. If you're a mono red player and you're going to use this deck, and well, if you're a mono red player, you probably already have this card. If you are just going to play this deck once in a while, or you don't do a lot of mono red builds, I would say skip this. But if you do either of those things, this is a very solid investment. Goblin Chain Whirler. This guy was the king of the hill back in the day. Year 2 on Arena, really. And the problem is there have been a lot of good goblins since him. He's not really used in the Brawl goblins at this point. He's not played in Historic goblins. He's not really played outside of mono red because of that 3 red pip casting cost. I would say if you've got it, run it. If you don't, not worth the wild card today. Reckless Storm Seeker, that is a card you have and should definitely run. Also, speaking of things that you should definitely run and is worth a wild card investment here is a Bone Crusher Giant. Particularly if you're interested in that Teamer Dragons adventure build, maybe getting ported into Historic. This guy is worth the wild card. Card advantage, a solid body, it's removal, it can go to face, it's just so many good things. Rampaging Ferocidon, on the other hand, a 3/3 with Menace, is just okay stats. The thing here that really made this card very valuable for mono red is that second line, players can't gain life. And if we were playing best of 3, I'd say this is a great sideboard card. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to that creature's controller. So again, very good depending upon what you're facing in the meta, but just not the sort of thing that is ubiquitously awesome for Explorer or Historic. I'd say it's not worth the wild card today. Kari Zev, the Skyship Raider, legendary creature, first strike, menace. This card is honestly always in consideration for being ban worthy in both Pioneer and Modern. If you don't have a copy, I'd say it is definitely worth the wild card. And we talked about using 2 wild cards here, and this is going to be tough to really talk about these other cards here. Runaway Steamkin is honestly awesome, both for the elemental decks and any kind of mono red burn build. We are doing more of a red deck wins here, where we are going on the back of both creatures and direct damage spells. In fact, we're probably a little heavier towards that Red Rush creature build. So while Runaway Steamkin is definitely part of the conversation and definitely something you should keep an eye on in adding to your collection, particularly for Explorer, I think it's not worth the wild card today. Soulscar Mage is very similar. A 1/2 with Prowess for 1 mana is very, very good. But we're not running as many spells in this deck, and I think this doesn't make the cut in the conversation. So here we go. We're down to really just 3 here, and I think we've talked about these enough. I think there are reasons to keep all of them. If you're really tight on the budget, if you've really only got those 2 rare wild cards, I think cutting one of these is going to be up to you, whichever one. I would definitely keep Bone Crusher and probably cut one of the 2 legends. That would be my thought process, depending upon which way you prefer to build this. But I would go with the Bone Crusher. All right, I readjusted the mana base, upping the mountain count to 18. That gives us a total of 21 lands. Of course, if there's any of these other cards that you don't own or don't want to spend the wild cards on, just up your mountain count. I think 21 is going to be more or less where we want to be, because for a red deck, we are running some higher mana counts here with 4 and 6 mana. Of course, Embercleave isn't often going to be cast for 6 mana, but it is what it is. So let's take a look at the rares and mythics that are available to us as part of our new player experience, because we are now down to 51 cards here. Gorogoru is part of that collection. I don't really think this earns a spot here. This just is not as ubiquitously useful as I would like to see in a rare from the new player experience. Same with Ogrehead Helm. I don't think this is a great card for this deck. Smoldering Egg could be good if we wanted a blocker, but really this is more for, in my opinion, an is-it control style deck where you need to be defensive for a few turns so you can get to that mid-range. I don't think it fits what we're trying to do here. Next up, we've got Professional Facebreaker. This is a card that could make it. I would almost say add this in and maybe run 1 less land, because the treasure aspect here will help you ramp into some of these other cards. Possibly worth doing. Let's see here. What else have we got here? Atsushi. It would be hard to say that Atsushi doesn't deserve a spot in this deck. Not only is it our red mythic for 2023, but he just does so much on the battlefield. Evasive 2 ways with both flying and trample. And when he dies, he creates treasure or gives you access to cards. Very, very solid. I think it's worth running here. What else have we got here? Jaxus. I can't remember if this or Professional Facebreaker is in the new player experience. But one of them is, and the other one is readily available through Jump In. I think they're worthwhile considerations, but I don't think either one of them is really going to be an all-star for you. Let's see here. What was it? Hellkite? Well, anyway, I think either way, we're probably getting a little off red deck wins here if we start running these. Burn Down the House is definitely worth consideration as a panic button card, but it would not be my first choice here. Honestly, I think there's probably some commons and uncommons that we would rather be running. And I think that's really it. Let's take a look then at last year's cards, because we are still kind of in that renewal period and we have a lot of overlap. Let's take a look at these and see what we got here that might be worth running. And just quick going through some of this. We got Arnie, but I'm not sure he's doing a lot for this style deck. What else did we get? Goldspan Dragon. Yeah, I can't argue against that. If you are around at a point to get this as part of your new player experience, definitely run it here. Let's see here. And in fact, that might be a good wildcard consideration if you didn't get a copy, but that's a different conversation. Meteor Swarm is not the worst thing in the world that you could be running. And neither is Inferno of the Star Mounts, but again, I kind of feel like this card gets a little off that red deck wins concept. All right, so that brings us to 53 cards, so that's 7 slots to spill. Now, typically for Explorer, we don't think about arena legal cards, and that's correct. But you've got to remember that there are some cards in your arena starter decks that are playable in Explorer. And for this year, I think Shock, I think we got 3 copies on that, so I would definitely go ahead and include that as more to the face, direct damage removal options. Burn Bright is also a card that is worth considering and is legal in Explorer. If you end up with more of a creature-based red rush, like if you're running Annex, maybe some of the other red wizards, if you had more copies of Lava Runner, etc., I think Burn Bright is a great 3-drop finisher and well worth considering, but I don't think it's necessarily found a home in this deck. For our last 2 slots, I am actually going to reach back to a card from the 2022 New Player Experience collections. That is Fireblade Charger. I know that we got, I believe, at least 2 copies on this in the red-white Warriors equipment deck. So most everybody out there watching this video should have that fairly easily. And he is a great target for things like Simian Sling, as well as Rabbit Battery to pump those guys up. And we have added quite a bit in the way of creatures here. So my final thought would actually be to go back to that Burn Bright. If things like Goldspan Dragon aren't in your collection, if Chandra isn't in your collection, if Torbarin is not in your budget, if let's see here, something like the Skyship Raider isn't in your budget, those are great filler cards, particularly with this low curve going wide. You'll be able to end games on turn 4 by hitting them with Burn Bright. The last change that I made is I cut 1 mountain for a copy of Spikefield Hazard. If you've been playing over the last year, if you drafted Zendikar, you should very easily have a single copy of this. If for some reason you don't, I think that's a strong consideration for a wild card at an uncommon, and it's easily attainable by most of you. And if you are playing mono red, or if you like that blue-red spells matter, this is a pretty solid card to have in the collection. All right, guys, so this is this week's Midweek Magic Explorer introductory deck. I don't know that anyone out there should run this exact build, but this is what I'm going to run because I think it's the most middle of the road for most of you out there with budgetary concerns. Hopefully the conversation that we've had with regards to this deck will allow you to go in and make the adjustments that you need to make for your own collection, your own availability of wild cards, and still have a good idea of what is worth investing in and why. There was a lot of cards also that we talked about that didn't make the final list, but if you have those, by all means, definitely consider running those in this deck over some of the things that maybe you don't have right away. I know that feels obvious, but I also know that there is a certain degree of people who don't actually watch these videos, just copy the deck list, craft it, and run it, and then wonder why they ended up spending more wild cards than they wanted to. Here's the tip, guys. Watch the video. So anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope you do very well in this week's midweek magic, and I hope I gave you some things to think about.
And as I do with many of the recent midweek magics, if this video gets just 10 thumbs up likes by 8 p.m. on the Tuesday that it's released, I will be live playing this event over on my new Twitch channel. We'll be testing out the deck, see how it works, and maybe even do some on-the-fly tweaks there. So smash the like button and tune in. What's that? You didn't catch all that? Well, Matt would like you to know that any deck list applicable to this video can be found down in the doobly-doo. And hey, let's not forget, the whole reason to participate in these totally free midweek magic events is the prize support is awesome. You get a rare for your first and second win, and then you get a random cosmetic for your third. How awesome is that? Alright, so with all that having been said, don't forget, smash the like button like Hulk would. And of course, comment and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And one last thing, myself, I'm coming to you from America, and I have noticed that about 1/3 of my viewership is coming from the US, and about 1/3 is coming from various countries. And there's about 1/3 of my viewership that is just getting lumped into other. So to let me know you got to the end of the video, throw me a comment down in there and let me know where you are watching from.